Thank you so much, praise team. A couple of months ago, it was on a Sunday morning about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know about you, my clock only has one 3 o'clock, and that comes in the afternoon. But anyway, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Caroline wakes me up and she says, "Did you hear that?" Like, no, I didn't hear that. I was sound asleep. And then I was like, "Well, what is it?" She said, "Listen, something alive is in the pantry." About that time, I began to hear this noise that she has heard, and I think about it for a moment. I said, "Man, there's a blame mouse in the pantry," and the pantry is just outside of our bedroom door. And so at this point, I get up, and Caroline is absolutely mortified. There is, I don't think, anybody on the face of the earth that hates mice any more than my wife does, and she's just mortified and grossed out and just repulsed by the thought of mice. And so she's in there, I guess, with a pillow over her head like this in the bomb shelter position. But anyway, I go to the pantry, and I open the door. I've cut the light on, and I don't have my contacts in, so everything's a little fuzzy, and I begin to look to see if I see this mouse or whatever this could be, to see any evidence of one having been here. And so I begin to move some stuff out of the left side, and I'm not seeing anything there. And so I go over to the right corner of the pantry, and I'm beginning to pull some stuff out piece by piece by piece. And as I'm focusing on the right corner of the pantry, out of my left eye and my peripheral vision, I see what is clearly some type of dark brown shape stick its head out and then go back in. So at this point, I know there is a mouse in there. And so now I need to shift my focus back to the left side. And so I begin to pull items out of that. I get to the point, though, with the left side is now empty. There's nothing over there. I thought, where did this mouse go? And so I go back over to the right side, and finally I see just a glimpse of him. He is back behind this big bag of potato chips in the back right corner of the pantry. At this point, I've got to come up with a plan of action. I already had a broom there with me, and so my initial thought was, I'm just going to beat this thing to death with the broom in the bottom of my pantry at 3 o'clock in the morning. But there were a couple of things that were a problem to that with me. First of all, this was a soft bristled broom, and the last thing I wanted to do was just kind of stun the mouse and just aggravate him, because the last thing I want at any point in the day, but especially at 3 o'clock in the morning, is an angry mouse running through our house. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book, doesn't it? Anyway, so I'm fearful of that. And then the other thing was, I thought, if I hit him enough, I'm not wanting to splay a mouse in the bottom of my pantry. And so I began to think, what can I do? And so finally I came up with this idea. I'm going to go get a trap. And so we had some, and I went and I got one. I put some peanut butter on it to bait it, and I put it as near as I can to the back right corner of the pantry. I shut the door, I turn the light off, and I go back into our bedroom. At this point, again, Caroline is just mortified. And we are in there, and I'm standing there for maybe 10, 15 seconds, and all of a sudden, I've got him. Some people think that's not a beautiful sound, but it's a beautiful noise to hear a mouse getting on the trap. And so at this point, I know I've got him. And so Caroline says, "Now, you got to get that thing out of here." And so at that point, I go back in there and I see that I have caught this. And as I'm getting my plan of action to get this mouse out of the house, Caroline says, "If you come in here with that thing, I will kill you." And so I get a couple of grocery bags, and I get him in there, take him outside, put him in the trash can for proper burial. Anyway, Caroline is just, again, mortified by all of this and just completely grossed out by the thought. And I go back in and I lay down in the bed to get ready to go back to sleep. And I asked her this question. I said, "What would you do if you were single, though, and that had happened? What would you do if I weren't here?" She thought for a second. She said, "I think I'd just sell the house." Because I'm just not going to deal with a mouse. At the end of her life, Caroline wants to look back and be able to say, I didn't have to deal with any mice. And when she says that, there's going to be no sense of regret, no sense whatsoever of, I missed out. She's not going to think, I missed out on anything related to mice. Let me ask you this, though. Would you not like at the end of your life as a follower of Christ to be able to say, listen, there is nothing that I missed out on that the Father wanted me to experience or wanted me to accomplish? For weeks now, or several weeks ago, we began a series walking through the Gospel of Mark, and a message or a series I've called Time Flies. And the premise of this series has been is very simple, and that is this. Jesus had just 3 short years of public ministry, but in those 3 short years accomplished every plan and purpose that the Father set forth before him. Time for Jesus, like for us, was and is passing quickly. He had that limited amount of time, but with that limited amount of time, accomplished everything that the Father wanted him to accomplish. Like Jesus, we too have a limited amount of time that is passing quickly. At the end of your life, would you not like to be able to say, you know what? Everything that God wanted me to accomplish, everything that He wanted me to experience, I experienced that. I did that. I don't have any regrets. There's no sense in which I feel like I missed out. Well, hopefully that's your desire. I hope that's your desire. I really encourage you to have that desire. But that leads us to another question. How do we get to that point? How can we get to the point and place where we are living in such a way that we get to the end of our life and our walk on this earth with Christ and we say, you know what? I didn't miss out on anything that He wanted me to do or anything He wanted me to experience. Well, how we get to that point is by understanding some things about opportunity, some things that Mark in his gospel makes clear, starting in Mark chapter 1. We'll begin reading this morning with verse 21. Mark chapter 1, verse 21. Mark chapter 1, verse 21. We're told then that Jesus and His disciples went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath He entered the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at His teaching, for He taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. But there was a man in the synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus rebuked the demons, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." When the unclean spirit had convulsed him and cried out with a loud voice, he came out of him. Then they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey Him." And immediately His fame spread throughout all the region around Galilee. Jesus is living and operating in such a way that at the end of His earthly life and ministry, He was able to say, all that was to be accomplished, I have accomplished. All that the Father wanted me to experience, I have experienced. How was it that Jesus was able to do that? The same way that you and I can. And it all hinges around the idea of opportunity. And here's the first thing that you've got to get. You've got to understand the need to seize provided opportunities. Understand the need to seize provided opportunities. Jesus at this point is 30 years old. His public ministry has been inaugurated. It's begun. It started with His baptism. Last week we looked at the calling of His disciples. And so with His disciples now, He's begun this public ministry in earnest. And as we get to verse 21, we're told that Jesus has gone to Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath He entered the synagogue and taught. One of the things I said at the outset of this series is that Mark uses repeatedly the word immediately to describe the action and the ministry of Jesus. Everything is happening so quickly. Time was flying for Jesus. And on this particular Sabbath day, Jesus has gone to the synagogue. And it's easy to miss this, but there's a couple of important thoughts just in that first verse. There in verse 21. First of all, it is the Sabbath day, and where do you find Jesus? Well, Jesus is in the house of God. He is in the synagogue. Now, repeatedly throughout the Gospels, we see anytime there's a Sabbath, Jesus is either in the temple or He's in the synagogue. He's in the temple, He's in the synagogue. And repeatedly, the Gospel writers use this phrase, as was His custom. It was part of the regular routine. It was part of the regular discipline of life for Jesus that on the Lord's Day, on the Sabbath day, He was going to be with God's people in God's house for encouragement, for discipleship, and for corporate worship. Let me ask you this. If it was important enough for Jesus, shouldn't it be important enough for us? As followers of Christ, we ought to be following His example. This was a priority for Jesus. Now understand, we're not in a temple, we're not in a synagogue, rather we're at a church. We're not on the Sabbath day, we're on the Lord's day. But what should characterize us as followers of Christ is on the day set aside for corporate worship and discipleship, well then we make this the place that we are committed to being there, being at. That's what Jesus did. But we're told also that not only was it the Sabbath day, but not only in Capernaum, but he entered the synagogue. Now, this may be something you've thought about or wondered about, and hopefully you haven't gotten confused, but just so that we're clear on this, repeatedly in the New Testament we see the use of the word synagogue and the use of the word temple. There was only one temple, and that was in Jerusalem, and the Jews throughout the region would make sure that at least one time of year, over the Passover and the Day of Atonement, they would make their way to Jerusalem to go to the temple. Now, that would be a significant distance for many of them to come, and so they could not do this on a weekly basis. There was one temple, but there were scores of synagogues spread throughout the region. In any sizable town or city, there was going to be a synagogue, a place for more informal worship on a week-to-week basis. And so as Jesus is in Capernaum, he's not going to travel all the way back to Jerusalem. He goes to the synagogue on that Sabbath day. And what does Jesus do while he's there? Mark tells us that Jesus taught. Now, it's interesting that this whole concept and how this worked in the first century. It's very strange and perhaps even foreign for us to imagine this. But Jesus shows up, and as the guest is given the opportunity to speak. It would be akin to me saying, all right, who's a visitor here today for the first time? You raise your hand and you say, come on up and share the message. In many ways, this is what would happen regularly in the synagogue in the first century. Some guest may show up unannounced. They would be given an opportunity to speak if they wanted to seize that. Jesus seized these opportunities. So too did the Apostle Paul, to great effect. And so Jesus is presented this opportunity to share, to teach, and to expound, and to express the truths of God. But let me ask you this very simple question. Why did Jesus speak that day? It's very simple. Because he was given the opportunity. Jesus, as was his custom, goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. While there, he's given the opportunity to expound the truths of God. And what does Jesus do? He seizes that opportunity. Why did Jesus seize that type or these types of opportunities? For two reasons, I believe. First of all, he seized them because the Father provided these opportunities, but Jesus also seized them because he understood very simply this: opportunities that the Father provides, they're always important. Opportunities that the Father provides, they are always important, and they ought to be seized every single time. I want you to think about this. What would have happened had Jesus not shared this message? Had he not seized this opportunity? I believe it is clear that this man who came into the synagogue that day with a demon inside of him, he would have left with a demon inside of him. At the end of this passage, we see that Jesus' fame is beginning to spread throughout all Galilee because of what took place in the synagogue that day. So because Jesus seized this opportunity, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people began for the first time to hear about Jesus and what it is that he actually has to say. So why did Jesus seize these opportunities? Because the Father provided them, and because Jesus knew these are important. Listen, as followers of Jesus, if we want to get to the end of our time on this earth like Jesus did and say, you know what, I've got no regrets, I haven't missed out on anything that the Father wanted me to experience or accomplish, then we've got to understand very simply the need to seize provided opportunities. But too many times what happens is that we just miss them. Jimmy Allen was the former pastor of First Baptist Church, San Antonio, Texas, and this is what he wrote. We missed him. Our chance to change things came and passed, and we did not know it was there. A dark-skinned little boy sat through Sunday school classes for 3 years at a great Baptist church, but we missed him. His name was Sirhan Sirhan, and at the age of 24, he shot and killed Senator Robert Kennedy. In a welter of words and the shudder of grief throughout our nation, the persistent thought keeps recurring through my mind: we missed him. We missed him. It was so easy for them, it's so easy for us, it's so easy for me, and so easy for you to just in the busyness of life forget the fact that God on a regular basis is providing us opportunities that He wants us to view are important, and He wants us to seize them. So why so many times do we miss these? Why are so many times we like First Church San Antonio? Well, because of a couple of reasons. I think first of all, we're just not paying attention. We get so busy and so caught up in the trivial issues of life and just the busyness and the hectic day-to-day schedules that we maintain that we're just not paying attention. And even if we do stop long enough to pay attention and think, hey, you know what? God is providing opportunities that He wants me to seize and that He wants me to take advantage of, Too many times we just say, well, it's just not that important. I'll get to that later. And you know what? That opportunity passes and it's forever gone. If you want to get to the end of your walk, your physical life on this earth with Christ, and be able to look back and say, I didn't miss out on anything that the Father wanted me to experience or wanted me to accomplish, then you've got to do what Jesus did, which is to understand the need to seize provided opportunities. But there's a second thing you've got to understand, which is this. Understand the nature or the value of genuine authority. Understand the value of genuine authority. Jesus, on this Sabbath day, in verse 21, he teaches. Verse 22, we're told that that's the people who were gathered there that day, they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. So there's a couple of things that we need to think about in this verse. We don't know exactly, and really it's just purely speculative as to the nature of Jesus' teaching. I mean, repeatedly in the Gospels, we have some of the things that Jesus said, but we don't know, for example, what Jesus' voice sounded like. If he had just this amazing radio-type voice that just draws the listener in, and you're just captivated based on the verbal tone and tenor of his speech. We don't know if Jesus spoke in such a way that just captivated listeners because he was so interesting, it was so compelling, his presentation of his message. Not simply what he said, but how he said it. We don't know any of those things. It's purely speculation. What we do know is that people paid attention to Jesus that day. They were astonished that day, not because of what he said, the manner in which it was delivered. Mark tells us why. They were astonished at his teaching because he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. Well, for that to make sense, we need to think about who the scribes are and what they did. The scribe's job, in short, was to copy the Word of God. And at this point, it's just Old Testament books. And so there's no copy machines, there's no lithographs, there's not even carbon paper, there's none of those things. So if, for example, you want a copy of Genesis or you want a copy of Isaiah, well, it's going to fall to the lot of the scribe to sit down and painstakingly copy every letter, every jot, and every tittle of every passage in that entire book. And so day in, day out, year in and year out, this was the scribe's job, to sit there and painstakingly copy and make all these duplicate copies of the Word of God. Now, think about that. These are individuals who every day, all day, week in and week out, they're copying the Word of God. Now, is there anybody that probably knows the Old Testament Scriptures as well as the scribes do at this point? Probably not. They probably know them far better than even the priests because, again, every day these words are going through their mind and flowing off the end of their pen. They are so immersed daily, on a daily basis, with the content of the Word of God. Now, because of this, they were not simply copyists, but beyond that, they were viewed to be experts about the Word of God. After all, they spent so much time with it. They spent so much time in it. They had written it time and time and time again. And so oftentimes they would be consulted to share their interpretation, to share their position, to share their thought about this particular verse or this particular concept. But notice when Jesus taught that day, they viewed Jesus and paid attention to Jesus and what he said because he had authority unlike that the scribes possessed. Now, if you go to the dictionary and you look up the word authority, you see that one of the definitions is power to determine, adjudicate, or otherwise settle issues. It seems by comparison, or it seems by contrast, that when the scribes would speak, when they would talk about biblical issues or they'd talk about anything, it just came across to people as an informed opinion, conjecture, their thought, their position. And people may hear that, they may give it the notion that it's reasonable, it's rational, it's well thought out, it is steeped in exposure to the Word of God. But at the end of the day, it just seemed like somebody else just talking and sharing their opinion. But when Jesus spoke, there was authority. When Jesus spoke, it was as if the definitive word had been expressed. That Jesus had, in His words, the authority. He had the power to adjudicate, to settle issues. So that when Jesus spoke, people recognized this is not just somebody giving their opinion, sharing their thought. This is somebody with real authority. I'd better pay attention to this one. He's not just somebody else sharing opinion. This is somebody saying, this is what God has said. And people took note. This was different. This is unlike anything they have ever heard. Because Jesus understood the value of genuine authority. Now, the truth is that we spend a lot of time either expressing or hearing the opinions and positions of others. You've got CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, that apart from just the reporting of news, so much of the time is spent with talking heads sharing their opinions. You look in the newspaper, magazines, they're replete with people expressing their opinions. When you're trying to make a decision, so many of us, you'll talk to your spouse, you'll talk to family members, you'll talk to friends or coworkers, say, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm facing, what's your opinion? And we spend so much time soliciting and hearing the opinions of others, and then so much time also expressing our opinions to others. And it seems as though we certainly value the perspectives, we value the opinions of others. But the truth is, what we need far more than opinion is somebody to say, this is how it is. This is not simply what I think. This is not a matter of conjecture. This is how it is, and it is this way because God said this. It's not just simply this is what I think, but this is what God has said. What people are looking for is absolute certainty, lack of conjecture, lack of opinion, and somebody just to say, thus saith the Lord. This is what God has said, and this is how it is. When Jesus spoke that day, they had never heard anything like that. And they paid attention, they marveled, they talked about this to others because of the authority that Jesus spoke with. And when He spoke, He was saying, this is what God has actually had to say. That settles the issue. Just yesterday morning, we were trying to get everybody ready. And Caroline and I had already gotten showered and dressed. It was time to get the kids bathed. And so Andrew was in the den, and Caroline told him, go tell Nathan to go get in the shower. And so he leaves the den. He goes to Nathan's bedroom. He's gone for just a few moments. He comes back in, and he says, Nathan won't come. And Caroline said, you go tell him that Mommy said to get in the shower. So Andrew disappears, and just in a matter of moments, what happens? Nathan comes parading through the den. He's heading to the shower. Why? Because Nathan understands and responds to authority. He recognizes that when Mommy or Daddy says something, well, that's just how it is. That's how things go. The truth is that not simply to 7-year-olds, but 70-year-olds, 107-year-olds, people respond to authority because they're looking for that. People are looking for somebody that'll give them more than just an opinion, more than a conjecture, more than, I think or I feel or, I don't know. People are looking for somebody that will speak with absolute clarity and say, this is how it is. People are looking for unchanging truth, foundational issues that they can frame their lives in. And listen, there's nobody that has that other than the believer, because we have what God has said. We have what the Lord has said, and people are searching to know what God has said and to hear somebody say, thus saith the Lord. And if you want to live your life in such a way and to experience a walk with the Lord that at the end of it, at the end of this life, there's no regrets, no sense, I just missed it, then you, like Jesus, need to understand the value of genuine authority and recognize there are people around you, people at school, people at work, people in your neighborhoods, people in your family. They're looking for something to hang their hat on. They're looking for something that doesn't change. They're looking for fixed standards. We have those because we have what God has said. You need to understand the value of genuine authority. But there's a final thing you need to get, and that's this. You need to understand the growing nature of In verse 23, we're told that there in the synagogue there that day, there was this man who had this unclean spirit, and so he's demon-possessed. And we're told in this passage that these demons inside, they begin to cry out, and they're saying, "Let us alone. What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth?" So here you have this man, and there's these voices coming out of him. It's the demons, and they're not speaking to the crowd, they're speaking to Jesus. And Jesus, in response, we're told in verse 25, rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Verse 26, it begins to be an ugly sight as these demons are causing this man to physically convulse, and there's this screeching, there's this crying out of loud voices. But then all of a sudden, this chaos and tumult is replaced by peace, tranquility. This man has been freed from these unclean spirits. He's been freed from these demons. Verse 27, we're told that everybody there then was amazed. They questioned among themselves, saying, "What is this? We've never seen anything like this. This is so different. Is this some type of new doctrine? Is this something that we've not yet been exposed to?" And then they say it, you see it again, their recognition of the authority of Jesus. They say, "For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." So people are just marveling. They're just amazed. But notice what verse 28 says. Immediately his fame spread throughout all the region around Galilee. Not simply dozens, not simply those who were in attendance, not merely hundreds, but it seems that thousands upon thousands of people began to hear about Jesus of Nazareth. And as they're hearing about Jesus of Nazareth, they're hearing about his power, how he speaks and demons leave someone. How when he speaks with authority, and it seems to settle issues. He's got real inherent authority. And so, family by family, home by home, community by community is hearing about Jesus. And how did all this start? Because on one Sabbath day, Jesus walks into a synagogue in Capernaum, and somebody says to him, "Would you like to speak today?" Something very simple, or as simple as that. "Would you like to speak today?" He's introduced and he begins to speak. And what happens? A man gets this demon exorcised, and Jesus' fame spreads throughout all of Galilee. Why does this happen? Because it all revolves around the nature of opportunity, which very simply stated is this: opportunities seized beget more and more opportunities. Had Jesus said, "No, today it's just my first time here in Capernaum, first time here in the synagogue, it's okay, let somebody else speak," would these things have happened? I don't believe certainly at this point these things would have happened. But it all transpired, it all occurred because Jesus seized one little opportunity which begat another and another and another. Jesus accomplished everything that the Father set forth before him. At the end of his earthly life and ministry, there was no sense of regret. No sense in which Jesus would say, "You know what, I just missed out." It's because Jesus understood the growing nature of opportunities. The past 2 years on Thanksgiving night, I have done something that some of you would describe as foolish, but some of you are also foolish enough to have joined me in a similar endeavor, and that is to go to Walmart on Thanksgiving night. And so for the past 2 years, I have done this. And I did so because I would look at the ads in the paper and see that there was some particular special that I would want to go out on a Thanksgiving night after having a full belly, to go out and brave those crowds and the chaos of Walmart to go and buy these things. And so for the past 2 years on Thanksgiving night, we were in Charlotte. We were staying at Caroline's parents' house. And each of the past 2 years, there was something specific that I had seen that I wanted to go to the store and get. This past Thanksgiving night, it was a surround sound speaker that you can hook to your TV. It was on sale for $38, and I thought, well, this is a great deal. And so after I don't know, 9 o'clock. I think the sale started at 10 o'clock. So I leave the comforts of her parents' home at a point where I could have easily just have gone to bed. And I get in the van and I head to Walmart, and the parking lot is packed. You go into the store, the aisles are packed. It's chaos. It really is. It's kind of frightening. It's kind of exhilarating all at the same time. You ought to do it. Even if you don't, just go to Walmart on Thanksgiving night. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, so I get there to the Walmart, and I go back over to the electronics section where I know that these speakers are going to be. I find it, and I'm just working my way, navigating back through the crowds to pay for this. As I do so, I pass this display where they've got all these kids' DVDs for sale. And many of these were some big-named movies, some popular movies that were on sale for $5. And so I get my cell phone out and I call Caroline and I say, hey, these are some movies that are on sale for $5. Do you want any of these? And she said, I don't think we need any of those, but let's get, she told me which movie to get for our nephew Max that we could give to him for Christmas for just $5. And so I picked that up. I began to head towards the front. As I do so, they've got this pallet full of Mr. Coffee 12-cup coffee makers for $9.87. And so I get my cell phone out and I call Caroline. I said, there's this coffee maker here. It's nothing fancy, but it's got a clock on it. You can set it to automatically brew in the morning, and it's $9.87. Do you want a new coffee maker? She said, ours is doing fine, but let me ask my dad. And so she asks her father, and he said, yeah, get me one of those. I'd like to have one at work. And so I pick up this coffee maker for $9.87. Now, I started that whole experience going for one thing, and I wound up leaving with three things. Let me ask you this. Have you ever given any thought to why Walmart, why Target, why all of these different stores on Thanksgiving night or on Black Friday, they have these big deals and these big sales and these steep discounts? Why are they offering these products so cheap? Well, it's very simple. They want you to do what I did, which is to see maybe one thing in that ad and go to the store. And they know if I can get you or they can get you into the store to buy one thing, you might leave with three things. 10 things, 30 things. Why? They know if I can get this one opportunity, if I can get them to seize that, then I can provide them a slew more. Walmart understands that, but you know what? The Lord understands that as well. That opportunity begets opportunity. Because Jesus sees this seemingly small, trivial opportunity to speak, what happens? He gets this other opportunity to exorcise this demon. Because he does that, what happens? His fame begins to spread throughout all of Galilee. Opportunity begets opportunity. Let me ask you this very simply. If you're here this morning as a follower of Christ and you'd say, I made a decision for Him at some point in the past, I'd say absolutely. I know in my heart that I'm a Christian. I know that I'm going to heaven. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like God has been able to do anything significant in and through you? Has there been anything big that God's been able to accomplish through you? If the answer to that question is no, might it be that the reason for that is this? You've never seized the small opportunities He provided? Because that's how it works. It starts with the small ones. And that begets opportunity after opportunity, and God continues to work. The opportunities get bigger, they get more consequential, they begin to matter more and more and more. So my question for you is this. At the end of your life on this earth, at the end of your physical walk with Christ, would you like to be able to say, as I believe Jesus said, you know what, I haven't missed out on anything. Everything that He wanted me to accomplish, check. Everything He wanted me to experience, check. Listen, that's only going to happen when you understand this whole idea about opportunities. That you first of all got to seize them when they are provided. When you seize them, you do so with the authority, not just sharing another opinion, not just saying, I think, I feel, but saying, this is what God has had to say. And recognize that when you seize them, God will provide more and more and more. So at the end of your walk on this earth with Christ, do you want to be able to say, didn't miss a thing? Well, it's up to you. It's up to the choices you make, and maybe whether you seize this opportunity this morning. Won't you bow your heads with me?